What's up, guys? Today I wanted to talk about 5 rebalancing mistakes that would absolutely destroy your portfolio. If you guys have been tracking your yield farming portfolio for a while and notice that your portfolio value is declining over time, especially over the span of, let's say, 3 to 6 months, then it's very likely that you're losing your capital when you're rebalancing. So if that sounds like you, then this video is made specifically for you. If you guys are just getting started, it's also very helpful to learn about this as well. Rebalancing is one of the more complex topics that we could talk about, and that's where a lot of beginners lose money, especially if they're not very deliberate about their rebalancing. And if you're new here, my name is Richard. I've been yield farming for quite a while now. And here's a quick portfolio update. The portfolio is doing quite well if we measure the profit and loss in Ethereum terms. You can see I'm up roughly 6.76 ETH. I recently closed this arrow to ETH position out for a profit here. So doing quite well. And if we compare the profit and loss against holding, I've been able to beat Impermanent loss and holding in the market pretty consistently here. And this is my other wallet that holds a lot of close position. You can see I've been able to be consistent over time. So these strategies do work for me. And just a quick disclaimer, none of this is financial advice. The crypto market is very unpredictable and volatile, so be sure to do your own research before making any investment decisions. So the number one rebalancing mistake that could absolutely destroy your yield farming portfolio is that you're chasing the range all the time. So last year in 2024, what I saw a lot of yield farmers do was they set a pretty tight range here when the market was moving sideways, especially on Ethereum and USDC. I saw that a lot of yield farmers, even people with years of experience, they're yield farming Ethereum to USDC, and basically they had a pretty tight range here, right? Let's say from 2850 or 2900 until around 2100 on the downside. You can see if you entered in August here of last year, you would have been in range for quite a while, but eventually the price of Ethereum moved up and out of range. So if you didn't rebalance, then you would not be earning any yield, right? And what a lot of people did was they chased the range upwards, first to here because the price was consolidating up here, right? And then ultimately they moved the range up here when the prices are moving sideways here. But the problem is if we chase a range like that, what we started out with was, let's say, Ethereum and USDC, right? As the price moved out of range, you're fully into USDC. And essentially, when you're rebalancing upwards, what you're actually doing is swapping some of your USDC into Ethereum at a higher average price than back here. So you're buying high here, and when the price dumps below your lower limit, then whatever funds you had in the pool is fully converted into Ethereum at this bottom price here, and your LP value would drop sharply here since you're fully into Ethereum from this point onwards, right? And what some people do is they basically just keep chasing the range downwards. They're swapping their Ethereum into more and USDC, and then it gets converted into Ethereum again. And then they repeat the whole process back down here when the prices are really cheap, essentially selling their Ethereum for a cheap price. And then when Ethereum's price recovers, they lost out on the gains once again. So this is called Greenchasing, and in my opinion, this strategy doesn't work very often at all, especially in low volume environments that we are currently seeing right now. Compared to last year in most pairs, if you guys are yield farming, you probably notice like a lower APR. There's lower retail interest in crypto, and there's just lower volume overall. So when you do this and the volume is not that high, then you're going to lose money in the process. And I can show you guys very clearly here using Beefy. Beefy is a automated yield farming tool, and basically they chase the range as well using the strategy that I just talked about, right? Let's say we click onto this Ethereum to USDT pool here. It shows like a pretty high average APY, right? If you look at the 7-day APY, it's 56%. And we can see that the pool got started back here in October 3rd, 2024. If we look at the APY here, you can see during the lifetime of this pool, the average APY was actually close to 100%, right? Because they had a relatively tight range here. If I just scroll back here, you could see their range is like above plus or minus $500 on each side, right? And they basically chase the range like upwards when the Ethereum's price is near $4,000 in December. And then they chase the range downwards when the price is near $1,500 a few months ago. So if we look at Ethereum's current price is right now at 2516 compared to when this pool was set up. It's back in October 3rd of last year. It's at 2362. So Ethereum's price is slightly higher than where it was when this pool got created. But if we look at this price here, which is the yield farming value, you can see the starting price of this pool is roughly at $1 trillion. And you can see right now it's only at $649 billion. So over time, this pool actually lost quite a ton of value just because they're chasing the range down, right? And again, like I explained, when you guys chase the range upwards, you're buying high. And then when you chase the range downwards, you're selling low once again. So this pool is basically chasing the range and buying high and selling low for you. But you can see this strategy doesn't work. This pool has been unprofitable for quite a long time. And this strategy only really works for pools that have really high APR. And you can outweigh impermanent loss by doing so, right? For example, this ETH and USDC pool here on Say. Say is a smaller layer 1 blockchain. But the APY of this particular pool is pretty high. If we look at this APY chart here, you can see this pool started roughly in August of last year, but you can see the 30-day moving average APY is like 400 something %, right? So more than 4 times of the APY of what we were seeing in the last pool. And you can see this employs like a range chasing strategy as well. And with an even slightly tighter range than what we were seeing. If we look at the price when the pool got started, the position price is at 31.87. The current price is at 25.17. If we look at the LP price, you can see it started at $1 trillion as well. And right now it's sitting at roughly 1.17 trillion. So a 17% gain, even though Ethereum's price is down from August of last year. So this pool is actually like the exception, not the norm on Beefy here, unfortunately, because the APR is enough to offset the impermanent loss in this case. But most of the pools, especially in low volume conditions, are not going to be able to basically offset the impermanent loss, right? So in my opinion, most pools don't actually beat like this impermanent loss by range chasing. And this pool has actually really little liquidity, right? If everyone that watches this video decides to add like $1,000 into this pool, then the APY would drop pretty significantly as well, right? So that's also something to consider if you guys are trying to yield farm with this very tight range strategy. And let's take a look at another pool as well. I know that Ethereum and USDC on Arbitrum actually has pretty good APR here for Uniswap. So it's probably this pool. If I click into it, I could look at the 1-year APY here. This pool got started in July 6th of last year, and the average APY is roughly 141% over this time period. So a bit higher than the first one that we looked at, but lower than the second one. But this one has much more total value locked, 62.22 million here. So it means that even if you add a ton of liquidity into this pool, the APY is probably going to stay the same. So back when the pool started, the position price is roughly at 3,000. Currently, the price is at 25.19. If we look at the price now, the price started at 893 billion, and right now it's sitting at 668 billion. So just from a glance, it's not very clear, but I can pull up a calculator here. So what I want to do is take the initial price at 3068 minus the current price here at roughly 25.20. So a loss of $548 just by buying and holding Ethereum, divided by the initial price at 3068. So roughly a 17 to 18% loss. But if we look at the LP price here, let's take the starting price. Let's say it's 891 minus 668 here, 891 minus 668. So a $223 loss if you put in $891 divided by 891. You could see you would be down 25% just by depositing into this pool compared to holding Ethereum, right? So this is the situation where we want to avoid here. You can see just holding Ethereum is significantly outperforming this LP here. And you could have just been staking Ethereum for like a 3 to 5% APR in that case, right? So this strategy doesn't work most of the time, even with like pretty high APR pools here. So that's the first mistake, chasing the range. And the second mistake is rebalancing too often. So we know that by chasing the range, you're locking in a ton of impermanent loss when you're rebalancing up and down, right? This is a very common problem with like tight range LPs. If you guys are running a tight range strategy and you're constantly chasing the range, it's very likely that you're going to lose a ton of money when the market draws down. And sometimes the drawdown would be pretty unexpected, right? Like what we saw this year with the Trump tariffs. So if you're rebalancing too often, you're basically buying at a high price and then selling at a low price, right? So that's something to consider. If you guys are rebalancing more than like once every few months, then you're probably rebalancing too often here. And this is especially true if you guys are just yield farming part-time. You're not like using very active strategies. Like for example, some people I see like look at the 5-minute chart or something, right? And they try to squeeze a ton of APR, but they're adjusting the range all the time and finding high volume pairs. And it becomes more like an active job rather than like, generating passive income, right? Those strategies typically aren't very scalable. And again, if the market drops, then you could stand to lose a bunch of money as well. But if you guys look at my pool here, for example, this Pixel and ETH pool, Pixel is a very small cap gaming token that I invested in and I'm bullish on. And you can see this position has been active for like over 200 something days, right? I didn't have to rebalance at all. I made a 68% ROI on my investment, earning 72% APR on the Ethereum that I deposited into this pool, and roughly 50% APR on my current capital. And one thing to understand again is that volume fluctuates over time. When the volume is very low, it's very likely that you're not going to be able to cover the impermanent loss if the APR is too low. So rebalancing too often could actually lose you money. Which leads me to the next point. The third mistake is not calculating your impermanent loss when you're rebalancing. Let's say we're yield farming Ethereum to USDC, right? If you guys had a fairly tight range here at, let's say, $3,000 on the top range, and let's say $2,000 on the bottom range. And so let's say we entered like near the middle of the range here at $2,500 Ethereum. And let's say Ethereum drops to $1,500 that we saw a couple months back, right? I could run the simulation here with this free impermanent loss calculator. For this example, I'm going to put $100 for the value deposit just to make the number easier to see. And what I want to do is change the price upward to 3,000. And then price lower to 2,000, price now 2,500, and we deposit it at 2,500 as well. So in this case, it's more of a neutral LP. I would be depositing roughly 45.2% Ethereum here and almost 55% worth of USDC. And the value I'm interested in is how much my LP would be worth when the price drops all the way to $1,500, right? So let's say price drops to $1,500, my LP would be worth 63.88. And so if I want to rebalance, then I want to basically calculate my impermanent loss if I do rebalance, right? And I'll run through quickly here how you could potentially rebalance in this situation. I will do what a lot of people call the snuggle rebalance, but I've actually adjusted it a little bit to make sure the impermanent loss is even less. So let's say at $1,500 Ethereum, my LP is worth roughly 63.88, right? What a lot of other people do is they drop the price range to 1,500 and then they keep the upper range exactly where it was, right? And in the simulation, I want to change the price deposit to $1,500 and then value deposit here goes to 63.88. So when we rebalance into this $1,500 price point here, our LP value would have dropped to this value, right? What we saw earlier. And the price deposit is at $1,500 as well because we're rebalancing at this price point, right? So this is how most people teach it. But the thing is, if you guys actually run the simulation, you would find out that if the price now, you change it back to 2,500 and you click on this dot here, you can see that my LP value would now be worth roughly only $88. So the price recovered by like 100%, but my LP value is down like 12%. And if my APR during this whole period is not enough to cover the impermanent loss, then I would have been better just to not rebalance at all and use my Ethereum for staking or doing some other stuff until the price recovered. So this is why running the simulation is very important. It's a big mistake if you guys are rebalancing without making these calculations, because again, you could be locking in a ton of impermanent loss. And this type of rebalancing actually has less impermanent loss than chasing the range that we just looked at, but still is quite significant. 12% is quite a lot, right? And it could be even more if you guys run even tighter ranges. It could take months for you to recover this amount of money, right? So in this example, let's say we entered back here in February. If the price dropped and then you decide to snuggle to $1,500 here, it is possible to basically recover like the funds that you lost if you do decide to lock in impermanent loss. But let me show you guys how you could actually have zero impermanent loss in this case. So what I want to do now, instead of just moving the bottom range, right, I'm going to keep everything exactly the same. In this case, I would move up the upper range as well to, let's say, 10,000. And you can see the price now at 2,500. It's almost at my original LP value, right? The reason why is because if I move the upper range up as well, my average sell price is going to be much better than, just moving the bottom range and keeping my upper range the same, right? So in this case, I would still suffer a 2.4% worth of impermanent loss. But with this pool, it's probably very easy to generate 2.4%. So it's not a big deal at all. And what I could do to reduce that amount even further is to extend this upper range to virtually infinity. And you can see at this $2,500 mark, my LP value would be worth $101, right? So in this case, I would actually make money when the prices recover. And then when the price is near my original entry, I could decide to rebalance and squeeze my range once again. So this is how you actually rebalance properly if you don't want to lose any capital in the process. And one quick note here, the lower you adjust the price lower here, the more impermanent loss you're going to suffer. Just like how we move the upper range, the higher you move up, the less impermanent loss you're going to suffer. So we don't want to move the price lower to be too low, right? Let's say you guys are rebalancing at the same price point of $1,500, but you move the price lower all the way to $1,000. If I click here, you can see my LP value would be worth only $95.28. And another example is, let's say I want to have even less impermanent loss. I could change the price lower to, let's say, $1,750. And at my original price, I would have 103.62, right? But the main mistake, again, is not even running through the simulation. And then you're just rebalancing, especially if you guys use automated tools like Revert to basically manage your position. You click like move range. It makes it super easy. And then you're locking in a ton of impermanent loss, right? The fourth mistake is rebalancing when you guys don't have to. So let's say we have a wider range here of $4,000 to $1,700. You would have been in range this whole time, right? Let's say you started in January and then the price dipped below your lower limit. So you could have rebalanced right away or waited like 1 to 2 days and then you decide to rebalance, right? But in reality, you didn't really have to. You could have just waited and the pool basically hopped back into range, right? So in this case, you didn't have to rebalance and you certainly didn't have to like chase the range downwards, right? If you guys were chasing the range downwards back here in April when the prices are cheap, it's very likely that you're going to be losing a ton of money when the market recovers. The way I like to look at rebalancing is you're basically like eating medicine when you're sick. You have to do it because your body can't, recover naturally, right? So the medicine basically helps you recover. That's kind of how rebalancing works. But if your body could basically fight off like the sickness on its own, then you don't really want to rebalance if you don't have to, right? Because every time you guys rebalance, there is a chance of losing money, especially if you guys are not doing it properly. But if you guys rebalance with the snuggle strategy that I showed you, you could still rebalance and still make a good amount of money doing so. Just be sure when you drag down the bottom range, you want to move up the upper range as well, right? And you also want to run the simulation to make sure that you're not suffering a ton of impermanent loss. But if I can help it, I basically try to avoid rebalancing when possible. And the last mistake when it comes to rebalancing that I see some people make is to do a 50-50 rebalance. So what a 50-50 rebalance is, let's say we were yield farming down here, right? If I enter like near the middle of my range here, I would have roughly 50% Ethereum and 50% USDC. And as the price moved up, I'm fully converted to USDC, right? And if I decide to rebalance up here, I would also have 50% Ethereum and 50% USDC as well. This is what automated vaults typically do. That's why they lose like a ton of money when the APR is not high enough, because it suffers like a ton of impermanent loss, right? When you guys do a 50-50 rebalance, it's more likely that you're going to stay in range for longer just because you have a buffer room on both sides of the pool, right? But the trade-off is you're going to be suffering a ton of impermanent loss if the market is very volatile. If we saw like whipsawing price action here, for example, back in January of last year, the price pumps up, dumps down, pumps up again, dumps down again. This type of very sharp like price movements is going to absolutely destroy a 50-50 rebalancing strategy. This strategy only works well when the market is trending up kind of slowly. Like for example, what we were seeing in 2023 leading up to 2024. If you were like chasing the range upwards like this very slowly, then the pool would have done very well, right? But the moment the market starts like whipsawing, then because you're suffering a ton of impermanent loss, it probably doesn't even make yield farming worth it, right? So that's something to, consider if you guys are doing a 50-50 rebalance. So just a quick recap here. There's 5 main mistakes, right? And they kind of all relate to one another. The first one is chasing the range. In the example that I gave, you see that most of the time the APR would not be enough to cover the impermanent loss, especially in a volatile pair like Ethereum to USDC, or if the APR is not enough to cover the impermanent loss. This strategy again only works when the APR is really high. Like for example, this ETH and USDC pool on Say here. It has done decently well because the APR is enough to cover the impermanent loss. But at the same time, I would argue that it would have done better with a wider range strategy that doesn't lock in impermanent loss. The second mistake is rebalancing too often. It's very clear with these automated pools because they rebalance really often here. And if you guys kind of mimic like this strategy, but you're doing it manually, you're losing both your time and your money doing so, right? So in my opinion, it's not very good to be rebalancing too often. The third mistake is not calculating the impermanent loss when you're rebalancing. So you want to make sure that the process is more deliberate rather than just something that you're doing on the fly. The fourth mistake is rebalancing when you don't have to. A lot of times we see the price move up, it moves down, and then it recovers, right? So you don't have to chase the range and rebalance if you don't have to. Because again, if you guys rebalance down here, like what this pool does, you're essentially selling your Ethereum at a cheaper and cheaper price. And then you're missing out on all of the gains when the prices recover. And the fifth mistake is doing a 50-50 rebalance. Just like how this pool is doing here, when you guys are doing that, it's capturing more APR, but with the downside of higher impermanent loss, especially if the market whipsaws back and forth, right? The price move up and the price move down and then it moves up again. You're going to be locking in a ton of losses, especially if you guys enter at a high price. And I don't have anything against Beefy here. I think it's a great pool, but you just have to be really selective of which pool you're entering into and make sure that the APR is actually enough to cover impermanent loss if you guys do use Beefy. So how do we actually not lose money from impermanent loss? The first thing to do again is to be more deliberate when you decide to rebalance. it should be more of a calculated effort. You can't just look at the chart and like decide the new range. You gotta calculate the impermanent loss as well, right? And kind of like estimate the APR and how much time it would take to make up the impermanent loss. If you're doing a strategy that locks in impermanent loss, and if you guys use my strategy, I lock in pretty much no impermanent loss at all if I don't have to. And the second thing you guys can do is basically set wider ranges when you yield farm. A lot of times if the market moves against you, when we're yield farming, especially if we have limited capital, is we have to widen our range and do a snuggle rebalance to basically minimize our impermanent loss. But in my opinion, if we're widening our range every time the pool gets out of range, to do a snuggle rebalance, then we might as well just start with a wider range to begin with, right? It's going to capture more of the price action. And a lot of times when the prices move through its like high concentration areas, I can show you guys right now in let's say Bonk and ETH pool here. So you can see the price has been pretty volatile here. It actually moved through this high concentration liquidity, and you can see my APR jumps up significantly when this happens. And you could only capture that type of like price movement with a wide range strategy, right? That's how I've been able to generate a good amount of APR by being in the right pools, yield farming assets that I believe would go up in value over time, and don't really have to worry about rebalancing at all, except in rare cases, right? So I hope that makes sense, guys. If you guys want to learn more about yield farming and how to do it safely, then be sure to check out these other videos on my channel. There's a lot of misinformation out there when it comes to yield farming, and I try my best to give the most accurate and unbiased information as possible. So be sure to check out these videos if you want to grow your yield farming portfolio. Thank you once again for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.